Good morning, I'm Bill Dixon from Webster Presbyterian Church. We are delighted you're all here. There is a sign-in sheet going around, so if you haven't gotten it, raise your hand, I'm sure it'll get to you. It's in progress right now. Cool. So we wanted to share with you this morning some of our experiences over the last 6 months with our trips to the border and some of the other activities we've been involved in as we've become more involved with some of the immigration issues in our community.
I look back in my family tree, I see that back in the 1600s, some of my relatives came to what wasn't the United States, but to escape religious persecution as part of the Anabaptist community. And I realized that as early as the 1600s and then 17 and 18 and 1900s, I had immigration coming throughout my life, and I wouldn't be here if it weren't for that. And then I also look at my children. My oldest son came to us through adoption, and he was adopted internationally from South Korea. He was orphaned with birth defects, and so he was I wonder what would have happened to him, otherwise. But he was a blessing to us, and really started our family after he was about 2 years old. I was surprised to find myself pregnant and have a second son, and feel that we were very, very blessed throughout our lives. So glad to talk to you about what we've experienced, and I think that you'll find a lot of really good positive things in what we have to say.
And I've been a member here at Webster Presbyterian Church for almost 33 years, so for a while. Before coming to Webster, I actually lived down in McAllen, Texas, so I lived in a border community for about 15 months, and then my in-laws lived there, and I in fact still have in-laws living in the McAllen area. So for the past 35 years, I've been traveling back and forth to the valley regularly. But I went recently on the Presbyterian Border Outreach Ministries Conference to learn more about the border situation in Arizona, because I was familiar with the border situation in Texas and wondered if the situation was, how similar, what the similarities and differences were with the situation in Arizona. So I was glad to be able to make that trip and be able to see for myself the things that were going on. All right, so I'll turn it back over to Bill.
If you'll go to the next slide, thank you. So, what was the first federal law prohibiting entry of undesirable immigrants, and what was it called? There it is. It was in 1875. So this is not a new exploration of exclusion that we're exploring at the border today. And that was something that I thought was very interesting as we explored our family heritages and the journey that we're on as Americans, that we've been navigating this space for a very, very long time. As we start talking about these things, Kim, if you go to the next slide. Is there... Okay, let's go to the next slide. There you go. So there's a few definitions we wanted to talk about a little bit. What is a refugee? What is an asylum seeker? What's an immigrant? What's a migrant? As we've been exploring this space, we've been working a lot with asylum seekers. But there are other terminology that's thrown around, especially in the media and things like that. So I find that there's some imprecision in how these terms are used, which can sometimes be a little bit explosive. So in terms of understanding what's a refugee versus immigrant versus migrant, refugees and asylum seekers tend to be escaping war, violence, or persecution of some kind. And so what we're navigating now, I think, as a people is how do we best be stewards of folks that are coming towards us and away from that. Immigrant and migrant tends to be a person of choice. So they're coming here because they're planning on it because of a job. Migrants tend to come just for economic reasons. Let's go ahead to the next slide, Kim. So refugees are being forced to flee their home because of war, violence, or prosecution. Usually there's an agency that's certifying that they're coming from a refugee country or area, but it's not just the UN, there are other agencies who do that. The status gives protection under international law, And so what that means to us in the U.S. varies over time, so we're navigating that as a people as well. And refugees, once you achieve legal refugee status, you can become a permanent resident and eventually gain citizenship. Asylum seekers. So these are folks that I've been working with over the last couple of months. So they're seeking international protection from dangers in their home country, but their claim for refugee status hasn't yet been determined. They have to prove that they are under threat from wherever they're coming from. Not all asylum seekers are going to be recognized as refugees because that tends to be geographically based as opposed to individually based. And according to U.S. and international law, crossing an international border for asylum, it's not illegal. Our laws actually allow that. Violence in Central America has driven a big uptick in asylum cases. I was in immigration court a couple weeks ago, and the backlog is now about 2 years in terms of from the time somebody appears in immigration court the first time to the time that their asylum case is actually heard. Next one. Then immigrants is a more general term. An individual's made a conscious decision to leave his or her country. There is a lengthy vetting process, as most of us know. You're granted permanent residency and then eventually have the opportunity to become a citizen. Then migrants, these are folks that typically move for economic reason. So they're coming to be paid to do specific things, pretty typically that people in the United States don't like to do, and they're seeking better opportunities. More often than not, they go back to their home country after working here for a while. So Webinger's gone through a period of learning what these things mean to us, and I'll turn it over to Lynn.
And as we, kind of thought through and listened, we, through our pastor Helen De Leon's connection, were able to get connected with a group from Canyon Lake Presbyterian Church who had already been down to the border and was planning to go back down again. So we teamed up with Canyon Lake, Mission Presbytery, Austin Seminary, and then Episcopal Seminary as well, to really see firsthand what was going on. And I'll say, as one of the folks that went down, we really went down with some trepidation, wondering really what were we going to see. Was it going to be safe? It's kind of the thing that you always wonder about. You can go to that. And this is the group. The next slide. This is the group. We went to the Catholic Charities Respite Center, and they were fortunate, kind of funny how things happen, but they got turned out of their previous location and actually were moved downtown into what was a nightclub, basically, a big old nightclub. And you kind of think about it and think, but I can't, looking back, I can't picture a place that would have been better to suit people. So this is the group that went, and there were groups from all over. And this lady right here joined us from Alabama. She's a retired Presbyterian pastor, and she really had seen so much on the news, and she really wanted to come out and see what was going on. So and there's Helen, our pastor. Hard to recognize her because she's not in her, professional looking robes, but we all looked a lot worse at the end of the day. Okay. And at the front lines, you can kind of see. I know these pictures are small, but up here is a big open area, much like this. And you see the one fellow like this, and you really did see a lot of the people showing despair. Right? They had, some of them had come from a long way, Venezuela. Some of them had been in the police force in Venezuela, and then, of course, when those coups went out, they weren't safe there. I wish that we could show you pictures of the children, but we were asked not to take pictures of the children, which we absolutely understood. But one of the things that we did do from Canyon Lake Presbyterian, they had come up with the idea of bringing these little dolls. And as you can imagine, they're just 2 pieces of felt sewed together, stuffed in, and decorated. And we had bags of those, and we would hand those out to the children who came out of the detention centers who really had nothing. Right? And after the folks had gone through their processing and they were getting on their way to go outside the border, they would come to these different areas where they would get food and showers and often change of clothes and either shoes or shoestrings. And you wonder why shoestrings? Well, they would cut their shoelaces so that they couldn't run, and belts as well. So we spent a lot of time helping to pass things out, basically. And upstairs, so that was the bottom, and upstairs was kind of the back lines. You can go next slide. This is Bill in Bill's van, and we were fortunate that Webster Presbyterian was very, very generous in the gifts of shoes and things that we could take down. So Bill's taking the things out of the van. We took them upstairs where they were processed, much like any other, processing area that you see, and processed into bags for sizes of different children, different things like that. And then this pile right here were things that they could not use and they were going to pass on. So high heel shoes, winter coats, things that that really weren't appropriate for those people. But we knew that they were going to be handed down. But from there, and if you look here, that's actually me. Realized that afterwards. So one of the things we really needed were kids' shoes of certain sizes. And Bill had brought the bags in, and I realized there were shoes, or somehow or other we realized there were shoes. So I took the bags downstairs back to the front line, and sometimes you have a gut moment, right? And I pulled out a pair of pink shoes, and there was this little girl who needed shoes, and was able to give her pink sparkly shoes. And nice to see those smiley faces for sure.
One of the really cool things about that experience was people came from all over the country because they felt gone there. People came as families, people came just because they wanted to infuse some hope into the situation.
Yeah.
And that was my major takeaway from that entire trip, was that hope.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this picture at the top was in the greater area, and people that were processed through this respite center really were going to go on from there to other places. They were going to California, to Houston, to San Antonio, to to Dallas, to Austin, to Chicago, all the places there. And one of the questions I had is, can you help? These are the most common destinations. So, and Bill's going to talk about how what we thought about afterwards. And then, as I said, they were very fortunate in their location because they were really right across the street from the bus station. So the next day we went to the bus station, and you can see this group here a little bit. Got one fellow who's a vet in a wheelchair, and he was spending his days there helping because he could speak Spanish, right? And so he could translate from the people, needing to go someplace and to figuring out, I don't know about you, but we don't have a lot of signs in other languages here in the United States. Right? We're not very good about that. And this little girl, not a little girl, young lady, was a teenager, and she had spent her whole summer vacation in the bus station helping people as well. And none also could have taught a class in organizational methodology. People who were there to help, and all members of this group called Angry Tias and Abuelas, who were out here to help. They were angry that people were being mistreated, and they were there to make sure they were able to help them. All right. And this is the larger group. We all went to dinner, and the lady on the end and many others are working on putting together, revitalizing a building that's down there and helping to set up some medical ministries at the site. But while we saw a lot of very hard things, I think that some of the experiences were somewhat depressing. I think, as Bill said, we were very, very encouraged by the positive things that we saw. We saw people from all ends of the political spectrum. This was not a left group or a right group, a political group. Nobody cared. Nobody cared down there. They didn't care what, anything. We were all there to make a difference. And I think the thing that encouraged me the most is that we could all do one small thing. We could make you know, those little dolls. We could donate shoes, we could donate belts, we could go down and help. But just one small thing makes a big difference in all of these people's lives. And so I think it really gave me a promise that there is hope coming. Oh, all right, I'll turn it over.
One of the people that we spoke to there, he was a father from Honduras, and he had taken about a month, he and his daughter, to come to the border. He had just been admitted by exception, and they were only allowing people through the border by exception only. The group who had been at the border before us, about 800 people had come through the respite center during that time period. Had you been there?
I have, yeah.
All right, so interject, please, if you will.
And that's what I was going to say. It was
Yeah.
huge, like thousands of people at the Catholic Charities Respite Center, and now there's hundreds.
Yeah, and exactly. We saw about 100 that came through. And what has happened is they're allowing only people through by exception. So what that means is there's usually a medical reason for them to come through or something like that. So we spoke to a gentleman who had come with his daughter from Honduras, and she has a growth on her chest, so she was allowed to come through. In talking with him, we found there had been a kidnapping attempt of the daughter while they were still waiting in Mexico to come across the border. That fortunately was thwarted. So when they came across the border and were being held temporarily in detention, they felt so much better because they were so much safer. Even though they're in detention, they felt so much better than when they were in Mexico. So we were delighted that we got to chat with them as they had some time at the respite center before they got on their bus to continue their journey on. One of the other things that we learned there is obviously the respite center there in McAllen is across the street from the bus station. All of the folks that are released from detention or are processed are typically brought to a bus station and given their materials to move to where they're going to move. The respite center, if there's time, provides support for those people, and they go there and have assistance. So we learned, though, from the folks there that the buses all from that part of Texas come through Houston. So as we returned, we were like, what is their experience once they get to Houston? So the delegation who had gone to that trip, we actually went to the Houston bus station to explore. Again, we found some folks doing great work. There was a lady who provides lunch almost every day. She's the same lady all the time. There's only about a half an hour gap between the time the bus arrives from San Antonio to take people to Lafayette. If you're en route on the bus system to the East Coast, you come through Houston, you go to Lafayette, and then you disperse to wherever you're going on the East Coast. So there's not a lot of time to eat during that time period. So there are folks that provide some support at the bus station during that time. We are exploring further who those folks are because we'd like to team with them to support that. Anybody here have any information about that? Please see me, because we are still exploring to find out how we can team with them to help.
How do you know which bus station?
It's the, actually, we learned from the folks in San Antonio.
Yeah.
So it is the Main Street, the bus station on Main Street.
Well, there's the Greyhound station, and then there's the not Greyhound
Yeah,
station.
it's the Greyhound station.
Okay,
Greyhound station.
because the not Greyhound station has buses that run back and forth to Mexico.
Yes, that is true.
So
that is true.
how do you know which bus station it is?
So we were specifically looking for the folks that were coming
Okay.
through for immigration. So
Okay.
that's Greyhound
Okay.
coming from McAllen.
Yeah, good question.
Or from San Antonio. It's McAllen
Yeah.
versus San Antonio.
Yeah, we're missing something there.
Yeah. The drivers, we found, were very motivated to assist the people that were in their buses. So you do have an app to help with language and things like that. So the folks in the bus station, at least their perspective, was the bus drivers were very effective in terms of helping people in that regard. So that was our visit to the bus station. There's still more work for us to do there to better understand what's going on there. Good.
All right.
The down here. Just the down there. Yeah. So the next thing that we did was, we hosted training
Okay,
here
go
for the
on.
Houston
Yeah.
Rapid Response Network. Is anybody here familiar with the Houston Rapid Response Network? Or SURD, Standing Up for Racial Justice?
Not really.
Okay. So the Houston Rapid Response Network, I was first introduced to it through the Standing Up for Racial Justice organization here in Houston. What they do is they basically align volunteers to support the Rapid Response Network. So there is a hotline that organizations can call into, or individuals that can call into when there's ICE activity in a specific area. And so what these folks do, you can go to the next slide. So this is a little bit of background about what that is. The Surge works with a specific organization, La Unidad Once, and so they basically team with them to provide information where there's ICE activity. You go to the next slide. Specifically, their activities are around the constitutional rights of undocumented people. This is basically the basis of that, the 4th Amendment, 5th Amendment, and the 14th Amendment. So their activities, where there's ICE activity, is basically to ensure that those people who might be subject to ICE activity are aware of what these rights are. So we're given, if you're a scout or if you're a respondent, you're given these kinds of materials. So it's written in English, it's written in Spanish, so that individuals who might be affected by this can be aware of what their rights are. And then the next activity, I'll turn it over to Kim, was a activity which was just last weekend. And Kim, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Okay, so as I mentioned, I was part of this conference, the Responding to an Exodus Gospel, Hospitality, and Empire Conference, which was sponsored by the Presbyterian Border Outreach Ministries. And so we have pictures of a couple of folks. In the upper left-hand corner, there's a picture of me and Helen De Leon with Claudio, and I will not say Carvajalis, who is a professor at Union Seminary. And he was the preacher. He did a lot of preaching during this conference, and is a very dynamic preacher. It was fascinating to hear him. He's actually from Brazil. And then down here in this corner, there's a picture of me with Jerry Stacy, who is currently with Canyon Lake Presbyterian Church. And I know Jerry because my husband and I attend Canyon Lake on an infrequent basis. And then this is Jesse Gonzalez, and both Jerry Stacy and Jesse Gonzalez are pastors, Presbyterian church pastors, and Jesse was actually an intern here in the Houston area in the early '90s, and started working with Hispanic ministries at that time. And they've both been very active in the Border Ministries activities. And Jerry was actually one of the founders of Border Ministries activities back in the early '80s. So these are, you can read these bullets. These are the things that we looked at and talked about when we were during the conference. So next slide. So these are some photographs of the border wall. And one of the things that I want you, and this is on the Mexican side, the conference was in Agua Prieta, which is just over the border from Douglas, Arizona. And so there are stunning murals all along the city side of Agua Prieta. And so these are just a couple of examples. And butterflies, of course, are symbolic of metamorphosis and change. And then we have here a picture of there's a bumblebee with the word hope. And all very colorful, very beautiful murals. And what I found, I wasn't sure what to expect. I had never been to Agua Prieta. And I will tell you that Agua Prieta is a very vibrant city. There is a lot of activity there. There are a lot of people who are working and going about their business, their daily business. So I was heartened to see that. Next slide. And so here we have a picture. This is another mural that, again, is very symbolic of two hands, where one hand is kind of reaching out for the other hand. And from my perspective, it looks like that's really a hopeful image. It looks like one person is kind of reaching out for another person who may be in despair or struggling to provide assistance. And then this is what most of the border wall on the US side looks like. And so we have here an unpainted rusting wall that has razor wire. You can see this is actually taken, I took this from the Mexican side, but you can see on the US side there's a lot of razor wire that's coiled up around the top of the wall. And so when you look at these, when you look at the wall, I want you to think about what message does this send? If you're standing on the Mexican side of the wall and you see a community that has taken something that is ugly and has transformed it into something that is beautiful, and the messages that these murals portray, and then you see the US side of the wall, and what message does that send? Yeah?
It's important to remember, though, that both sides are U.S. That these might be American citizens that are paying that. They're just sick and tired of this wall.
Well, that's true. I will tell you that while we were there, I did witness Mexican citizens who were creating the murals.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Okay, next slide. All right, so this is a picture of the road, the street that is, so the wall is right here. This, just here's the sidewalk and there's the wall. This is the street that kind of runs parallel to the wall. And you can see this line of cars. So that's at 8 o'clock on Sunday morning. And so already you have a backlog of traffic in Agua Prieta that is trying to cross over into the U.S. Now, just past, so if you continue to walk down this sidewalk towards the port of entry, there's this tent that's been erected against the wall here. This tent is actually, it was actually erected by the Migrant Resource Center. So there's a group that's working in Agua Prieta at the Migrant Resource Center, part of Presbyterian Border Outreach Ministries, that is accompanying people who are trying to seek asylum. Now, the people have to stay in this tent, which is right next to the port of entry. When the Border Patrol officers decide that a certain number of people can be allowed in, and not every day are people allowed in, so every day a few people are allowed in. And so when they make the decision, then the U.S. folks who are accompanying the people inside this tent will take the number of people to the Border Patrol agent to be processed in as asylum seekers. Now, the wait, once you get to Agua Prieta as an asylum seeker and you're being assisted by both the Migrant Resource Center and other agencies who are working there in Agua Prieta, once you get to the tent, the wait could be anywhere from a week to 2 weeks before you can actually get into the U.S. Now, they have probably between 8 and 10 asylum seekers who are waiting in the tent at any given time. Now, they don't, there really aren't any bathroom facilities or anything there, so they take people back. The Migrant Resource Center is really only a few blocks from here. So they can take them back to the Migrant Resource Center to have something to eat, to take a shower, to take care of personal needs. And then they go back to the tent to wait in line for their opportunity to cross into the U.S. Okay, next slide.
Question.
Oh, yeah.
Did they sleep in there during the night, or did they go back to the migrant center?
I was unclear about that.
Okay.
But I got the impression that that this was occupied pretty much 24 hours a day.
Okay. Thank you.
Next slide. Okay, so this is so that the picture in the top right corner is actually a picture of the Migrant Resource Center, and it's not a very good, it's not a great picture, but then we were asked not to take pictures of the people who are seeking asylum because they're in a very difficult position, and the Mexican government has been pressured, or is under a lot of pressure, to stop the flow of asylum seekers and migrants. And so the Migrant Resource Center has experienced some challenges in the last period where Mexican officials came up, I guess it was even on a Sunday evening, they drove up with a lot of vehicles and people with guns and said they wanted to come in and count the people who were there. And the Migrant Resource Center folks did not allow them to come in. However, it was clearly a show of force. It was clearly pressure and harassment on the folks who were there. And so it's clear that the Mexican government is making things difficult for people who are trying to cross and get asylum, as well as the fact that it's very difficult from the U.S. side for people to come across.
So the Migrant Resource Center is on the U.S. side?
No, it's in Agua Prieta.
Okay.
There have been some efforts to move migrants from those centers further into this, away from the border, further into the states within Mexico, which have been met with some resistance.
So if you move the migrants further away from the border, that makes it more difficult for them to cross over because they don't, when their number comes up, if they're not there, they can't come across, right? Okay, so this was we actually had a worship service Sunday morning at the wall, and again, on the Agua Prieta side, and we had tables and chairs set up. And it was really a wonderful service with a lot of singing, and it was very celebratory, and wonderful preaching again from Claudio Carvajal. This is a picture of the port of entry from Agua Prieta into Douglas. And so Sunday after the worship service, we had our luggage with us and we got in line, and then we were able to come in through the turnstiles in a very orderly process as the border agents were taking people one at a time and looking at documentation and then processing them through. Okay, next slide. That's all I've got. Does anybody have any questions about the conference or about Douglas Agua Prieta? Yeah.
About the conference, is that a one-off thing, or is that going to happen again? Or?
It happens. I think it happens every year. It's something that happens on a fairly regular basis. There is a Presbyterian Border Outreach Ministries website if you care to go there and find out what their schedule is for activities and events.
Yeah, we have a resources slide associated with this deck, so if you want the deck, let us know. I think, Glenn, does it get distributed, or how does that?
We can do that, or also we'd like the deck to be able to incorporate into the video.
Okay,
So
I do
I'd
have
love
that in
to
my
have the
pocket
deck.
for you.
Yeah, and then, because, they'll be seeing it on their computer and be able to see pictures more clearly.
Yeah.
Another thing that happened the week before the conference was that the Synod meeting was in Brownsville and McAllen. And so Shelley Hernandez, who's the past moderator of the Synod, and Isabel Rivera-Velez and Steve Hill and I were able to be there. And I think that's everybody that's in the group that was there.
Yeah, I think so.
And so we also were able to cross in Brownsville. And the crisis in Brownsville, it's not on our side of the border, it's on the Mexican side of the border.
Right.
So imagine if everybody in this room stood up and put their arms out. I think that we would pretty well fill this room with that, right? So imagine that those arms out is a tent. And you're living in that tent with your 3 or 4 kids. Think of that. If everybody in here did that, what do we have, maybe, I don't know, 40 people here plus 4 kids? That's a whole bunch of people, and that they would be living all in this with again, no plumbing, all of that. The angry abuelas, or tias and abuelas, which means angry aunts and grandmothers, were recently able to add, I think, 5 porta cans this week. So now there's 10 porta cans to support a village of 1,300 to 1,500 people. They have shower buildings that are kind of look like an outhouse, but there's no running water to them. And so you have to get a bucket of water from the river in order to be able to bathe. It's not really clean water. And this week when it got cold, they've been trying to find plastic to go over the tents, trying to find socks to keep kids' shoes warm, or feet warm, because they're mostly running around in flip-flops, trying to find long-sleeve t-shirts and all of that. There's a group called Team Brownsville that goes in, twice a day and offers food for the 1,200, 1,500 people, however many are there, twice a day. So volunteers come and bring them food across the border. They have to haul it all in wagons. They try to get, there's a free store there, and they try to get commodities, maybe what soap and feminine hygiene products and clothing and diapers and all of that, because there's not much there. We met a guy who had been deported from Irving. His family's in Irving, but he was deported. I think he had 3 kids in Irving, and he can't get back to go to work because he got deported. A guy from Texas City. I said, "Oh yeah, we're from Houston." He just kept walking. So it's an incredibly moving experience, but what's happened is that we're not hearing about it now as much because the crisis is on the Mexico side and not on our side. Back in February it was on our side, and so was a crisis. It's not less of a crisis, it's just not as much our crisis as it is theirs.
One of the things a lot of people don't understand about the border is how porous it is. It's a very porous border. When we went across to Agua Prieta last Friday afternoon, we had our luggage behind us and we were driven to the border. We took a taxi rather we left our rental car at the church in Douglas, and we got a taxi to the port of entry. We got out, we grabbed our luggage, and we walked up to the border crossing. We walked through the U.S. side and we walked into the Mexican side of the border, and there was a kind of like a big light pole, and you walked up and you pushed the button, and if the light shone green, you just walked on through and nobody asked you any questions. If the light turned red, then you had to get your luggage, you pulled it up, and they kind of looked through it a little bit, and they closed it up and you went on through. Now when we were coming through on Friday afternoon, we actually got to the border crossing about 3:30 in the afternoon, and there were a lot of school children who had gotten out of school in Douglas and who are crossing over the border to go back into Mexico to where their parents would pick them up. So these were American citizens, children who had been born in the U.S. but who lived in Mexico with their Mexican parents, who would go across the border in the morning to go to school and would go back across the border in the afternoon to go home to Agua Prieta. And people cross back and forth across the border every single day to work and go to school and go about their daily life. The border, and this is both in McAllen and in Douglas and Agua Prieta. It's a very porous border with a lot of transit back and forth. Yeah.
In addition to the Synod going to McAllen, a few of us went to the El Paso Juarez border in August. And I was very struck by those two cities are very codependent on each other. And there are American citizens that live on the Mexican side and come and work, go back and forth. We went to 2 missions in Juarez, Pasas de Fe, which is a partnership with the Mexican Presbyterian Church and the local community PCUSA churches in El Paso. And they house and feed people seeking asylum. A lot of those were from Venezuela. We also went to Casas de Inmigrante, which was a Catholic organization there in Juarez. I was struck so much with the hope that you mentioned, and I was also so moved by the way those 2 cities work together. And we have to remember, this has been going on forever, like you mentioned in the beginning. They worked so well together. I was very moved by that.
Yeah.
Well, consider that this used to be Mexico.
Yeah.
Right. That's a really good point.
The Sanderson Monument's not that far away.
Yeah, that's right. So we as a congregation are still navigating this space from a human rights perspective, social justice perspective. What should our role be in understanding how do we alleviate some of this human suffering? So our next trip to the border, well, when we planned the August trip to the border, I spoke to a whole lot of people who really wanted to go, just the timing didn't work out. So we have a number of people who want to go again. This time we're going to team with Team Brownsville.
Wonderful.
That's the plan anyway.
Yeah.
And the trip is actually going to be January 2nd to the 5th, I believe. So if anybody's interested, please let us know. You're welcome to join us. We'll make as much room as we need to make.
Take your passport.
Absolutely.
Yes, yeah, you do need to have.
And if you're under 21, you can't cross without a parent, is that the?
I don't remember.
I think passport, and what is it, like 3/4 and a nickel or something?
Oh,
No,
yeah.
seriously, yep, yeah.
I didn't know that, no.
Yeah, it's, what,
to
the
pay,
total
come
of
back.
five
You have to
quarters
pay to
and a
cut-
dime.
yeah, yeah,
that's
something like
right.
that.
I owe
Okay.
Steve money.
Yeah, I just knew it was quarters and nickels that we all had to have.
Yeah.
Interesting. You had a comment?
I just would add that about the under 21 piece, we actually have a group of Presbyterian college students that are planning a trip for MLK weekend.
Oh, good.
And so because those dates happen to fall when a lot of our students will be at the Montreat College Conference. So if you have college students that are interested in going, I'm with UCM Aggieland, and so I realize that not all college students in Texas have access to a Presbyterian college ministry.
Yeah.
So come see me today, we can swap information. And
We definitely want to talk to you.
The fabulous Amy Klankowski.
Yeah.
And we may have some college students going with us in January,
Super.
but it'd be
Wonderful.
interesting to see
Yeah.
if they would, want to.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
And
had a group.
if there are groups within the presbytery that want us to help sponsor, I'm happy to do that. And so, we can continue to do that. Team Brown, and if nothing else, at least look for Team Brownsville on Facebook, look for Angry TS and Abuelas on Facebook, and follow what's going on. It's still a crisis.
Yes.
Are the Presbyterians providing any legal services?
I'm not.
Yes.
Are they? Okay.
Yeah, Presbyterian Border
Uh-huh.
Outreach Ministries has, there is an organization that is helping to provide legal services, and Presbyterian Border Outreach Ministries has information about that.
Are they
They
working
definitely
with
are.
Catholic charities?
I'm not sure exactly all the different organizations that are teamed up. It wouldn't surprise me if they were, but I think that they're actively looking for volunteers who have legal training to help.
Well, and consider it's a really long border from Brownsville to California.
Yes, ma'am.
So, I heard nobody's coming in. Is there really anybody coming through the bus terminal here anymore?
Oh, yeah, there are definitely people coming through. Yeah, range.
It's not the mass that was a few months ago.
But, 15 people, there's people. Yeah, so one of the things that we heard when we came back from our trip, obviously we're really excited. We learned a ton. We learned things that we didn't expect today. It changed us from the perspective of hope. And that was our major lesson, to see people who were just so elated to come to the U.S. side and be in conditions that we would not like. But they were so excited to be here. They were so happy. The bears, the stuffed bears, to give those to the children and see them having just a great time hitting each other. It was really, really cool. So we were very, very, very heartened by the entire experience. But one of the negative feedback that I heard here was there's a lot going on in the Houston area. What can we do in the Houston area locally? And so that's why we started working with Surge. And Surge has also opportunities to accompany people to immigration court, to house people when they're in their journey for asylum, once they're released from detention. They might have to temporarily be housed someplace before they continue on their journey to wherever they're going. So and babysitting, La Unidad Once has a monthly meeting, and that's an immigrant-run organization. But they have children, and so they need help with childcare. So there's a lot of different ways that we can locally plug in as well. So we're exploring what's the right balance of all that, and giving people the opportunity to participate and come alongside of us wherever they possibly can.
One of the things that we have asked in our 2 Synod trips was, what can we do when we get home? And we were told by many of the organizations, to plug in different organizations is a good thing, but also, we all probably have seen people who are seeking asylum in our city, and we just don't know it. And if we just keep our eyes out for individuals that look like they may just need a friendly face, they may just need someone to connect, to care for a minute or more, they're out there. I don't know exactly how to find, but they're out there. And so they encouraged us to just reach out to fellow human beings that may look lost within our own communities.
Isabel pastors a church of mostly immigrants. And so some of them are undocumented, and they get ice at the door, and what do we do?
Here in Houston?
Yeah, here in Houston, it's over in the Heights.
We do have one family that had a very good case, and they were denied. I
And after all of that,
Yeah.
and arrive to get sponsored, to get established, go to the court hearings regularly, finally get your court hearing, and the judge just throws it out. It's in the stack of many,
Yeah.
and they just throw them out.
Some of our UICC kids serve on the council, living here.
Mm-hmm.
And their lifestyle is catch me if you can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That, you know, if you do have the opportunity to drive somebody to immigration court, you really do learn a lot through that process. And I did have the opportunity to do that. So I encourage you to participate if you have the chance.
Another point I would like to say is an amazing ministry. Focus in one part of the problem. In my perception, we have 2 points: where they come, and where they go.
Yes.
I think the whole picture is very challenging for us to do something where they are right now, because the few percent of the people come from that. The 100% is in their country,
Yes.
suffering,
Yeah.
very hard situation.
Yes.
And I'm very interested to work.
Where they're coming from.
Yes,
Mhm.
because I think with very few resources, we can change a lot their life there where they are.
I think that's a good point. I had the opportunity yesterday to go to a lecture at U of H, and the point of that lecture basically was, you know, the birth rates in the United States are falling. We're not replacing our population. So we have to rely on immigrants to keep our standard of living where we currently are. So there is an ethical choice there. So do we want to keep the disparity that causes people to want to come to immigrate into the United States? Does this sustain the way that we live here? There's a big ethical question there, you know, or do we want to really solve that problem? So
Another challenge we have, I think, is to have our church more open to receive these immigrants.
Yes.
It's very interesting because the church where I attend, I took very different pictures during the service, and when I arrived at my house and I saw the picture, very multicolor.
Yes. Yes.
People. I said, that's amazing. We have to open our eyes for this ministry because God has gave us opportunity to receive different colors in our church. And for that we have to understand better their culture,
Yes.
to accommodate the conflicts, to accommodate the way to worship, something like that, to be welcome to them.
Good point. Thank you. Yes.
There are other opportunities in the Houston area. There's one San Diego outreach, and they have medical facilities there. The Interfaith Community Clinic in the Woodlands. I would say, I'm not supposed to say, but the number of people that are undocumented, and we no longer leave the door unlocked between the front and the back because we figured out how we can keep ICE out.
Yeah.
So there are medical facilities for some of these people.
Good. Thank you.
Something else, if people are looking for an easy way, if they're passionate about immigrant justice, we just learned this week with a group that I work with in the Brazos Valley that on November 14th, there was a formal announcement in the Federal Register that all of the costs associated with legally immigrating are skyrocketing. 79 to 83% increases on green card, citizenship application, all of those things. They've also shortened, normally when that happens, you get a 60-day window for public comment. They've shortened that window to 30 days. And so there is an opportunity to provide public comment through December 16th. And I have more details about that. So again, if you want to come find me during Presbytery today, I'm happy to share that information with you and share that link with you.
Great. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Could we get, is there somewhere we can get that slide?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I can give it to you. Anything else? Well, thank you very much. We appreciate all your input, and again, we encourage you to join with us on this journey. Things are very fluid at the border, as well as our response as we figure out what's our best way to go forward. Be as inclusive as we possibly can. Thank you.